The human delegation stood awkwardly on the periphery of the Galactic Council's central chamber. Sleek chrome and bioluminescent organisms formed a stark contrast to the humans' utilitarian gray suits. Grand Ambassador Yulis, an insectoid creature towering over most species, paused his address to the council. His multifaceted eyes narrowed as they flickered toward the human contingent. A translator emitted a string of clicks and whistles relayed as a disdainful, "The upstarts are present, I see." A current of derisive murmurs swept through the room. Earth's admission to the Galactic Council had been controversial. Many established races felt threatened by humanity's rapid technological advancement and penchant for unpredictability. While formally here to negotiate trade routes and establish diplomatic ties, the human delegation felt more like zoo animals awaiting examination. Among the humans was a young man named Michael. He wasn't a diplomat or a scientist. He was a technician who'd drawn the short straw and ended up responsible for ensuring the delegation's comms links worked flawlessly. He'd hoped to blend in, but Yulis's barb and the resulting wave of condescension had his ears burning. There were limits to his patience. Michael had quietly observed these last few weeks, the subtle snubs, the dismissive tones, the way every race seemed to view humanity as precocious children at best and dangerous vermin at worst. He couldn't take it anymore. As Ambassador Yulis turned to resume his speech, Michael deliberately stepped forward, forcing himself into the center of the chamber. The Galactic Council went silent. All eyes, compound and multifaceted, swiveled towards the lone human figure. The technicians of other delegations had a moment of shocked camaraderie with Michael. They knew that feeling of being overlooked and underestimated. Yulis stiffened, an almost comical expression of outrage rippling across his chitinous features. Michael stood his ground. He was no soldier, no politician. His hands were calloused from fiddling with tech, his frame soft after weeks of cafeteria food on board the cramped delegation ship. But at this moment he held himself tall, shoulders back, and met the gaze of every alien in the room. Security personnel, various reptiloid species outfitted with discrete energy weapons, began to move towards him. Michael didn't resist, but he didn't back down. He reached into the breast pocket of his ill-fitting suit and drew out a simple device, a battered, old-fashioned MP3 player. He'd snuck it aboard, his guilty pleasure for those long, lonely nights preparing for this trip. Before the guards could reach him, Michael pressed a button. The silence of the council chamber shattered. The opening riff of a classic rock song, heavy on guitar and drums, blasted across the room. It was primitive, loud, and utterly, unapologetically human. Michael saw the confusion on their faces. This wasn't an anthem, a plea, or a speech. It was a primal roar, a soundtrack to defiance. Ambassador Yulis let out a screech of indignation, the translator relaying it as an outraged demand for silence. The guards hesitated. The song wasn't a weapon, but it was certainly a disruption. Yulis gestured for them to act, but they seemed even more perplexed by this unexpected show of spirit. One by one, the other humans in the delegation began to straighten. The seasoned diplomats put on grim, determined faces. They knew this was a diplomatic disaster in the making, but in their hearts they couldn't help but feel a flicker of defiant pride. The scientists, usually so concerned with equations and data, watched Michael with a mix of apprehension and fascination. This was an experiment they'd never anticipated. The song's tempo changed, the raw energy morphing into something more focused. Michael stepped forward again, no longer simply defiant, but now purposeful. He began a strange, rhythmic movement, not a traditional dance of any Earth culture, but a mix of jerky, precise gestures seemingly synchronized to the music. The aliens watched, utterly baffled. Was this a threat display? A mating ritual? Some kind of technological demonstration that their translators failed to decode? Security dithered, unsure if they should intervene in what increasingly looked like bizarre but non-violent behavior. Michael paid them no mind. Humans weren't the strongest species, nor the fastest, nor the most naturally gifted with psionics or bioengineering, but they had something else, an indomitable, often inexplicable, drive to create, express, and push against boundaries. And Michael, the frustrated technician who simply wanted a bit of respect, had inadvertently become the embodiment of that spirit. A ripple went through the assembly as the song built towards its crescendo. Younger delegates from various races began to tap along to the infectious beat, a few even bobbing their heads subtly. Music seemed a universal language, even if this particular melody was an acquired taste. Some older, more traditional members clicked and hissed in displeasure, but the growing curiosity and a strange sense of anticipation drowned out their disapproval. Michael himself was lost in the performance now. His movements grew smoother, transitioning from jerky defiance to something resembling a defiant dance. It wasn't graceful, not in the way the lithe feline delegates might dance, nor imposing the way reptilians would. It was raw, a little clumsy, but undeniably powerful in its way. The song finally reached its climax, a sustained, powerful note hanging in the air before crashing into a chaotic series of drum beats. Michael froze in place, the last echoes fading. The council chamber was utterly silent for several heartbeats. Then, a single delegate, a small avian creature with shimmering plumage, let out a trill of what could only be interpreted as applause. Another joined in, then another, until the chamber was filled with a cacophony of alien sounds, all signifying hesitant but genuine appreciation. Even Yulis, though visibly displeased, couldn't deny the sheer force of will the human had displayed. Michael stood there, breathing heavily, a sheepish grin spreading across his face. He had no idea what consequences awaited him, reprimand, punishment, possibly even expulsion from the council. But in that moment none of it mattered. Humans, it seemed, would not be so easily ignored after all. In the weeks following Michael's impromptu performance, the Galactic Council was in an uproar. His actions had flown in the face of tradition and diplomatic protocol, but the incident became fashionable in a strange way. Younger delegates from various species began to seek out human music, fascinated by its raw emotional power. A few even tentatively tried to imitate Michael's dance, sparking an intergalactic fad for awkwardly rhythmic movement. The humans found themselves in an awkward but advantageous position. The diplomatic mission was still tense, and trade agreements were still slow to materialize, but there was a shift in the atmosphere. No longer were they simply the oddity, the potential troublemakers. They had earned a grudging measure of respect, a recognition that they possessed a unique fire. Much to his own bewilderment, Michael himself became something of a minor celebrity. He was bombarded with interview requests from alien media outlets eager to understand his musical choice, the strange movements, and most of all, the motivation behind such a defiant act. He tried to explain, as best he could, the feelings of frustration and the desire to be seen as more than just a technologically advanced infant species. Ambassador Yulis remained stubbornly resistant to the change, but his disdain grew less overt. Perhaps he realized that open mockery invited displays like Michael's, which only seemed to make humans more interesting to everyone else. The council's focus shifted slightly. While caution remained, a new element entered the equation: curiosity. The human delegation wasn't sure if it was a victory, but it was definitely progress. And at the heart of it all was Michael, the technician turned unlikely revolutionary, who had inadvertently shown the galaxy humanity's greatest strength, the burning need to express themselves, whether through art, music, or even a defiantly clumsy dance in the center of the most powerful assembly in the known universe.